I'm Professor Erica George, and it's my pleasure to welcome you, to thank you for your participation, and to thank especially the people who made today possible. I'm thinking specifically of Courtney Macbeth and Laura, and the so many that we'll hear from today. It's my privilege to introduce the topic for this panel, this presenter, and the moderators who will introduce their own panels. The topic of this section of the program is university research and innovation. And you'll hear a talk on interdisciplinarity, a panel on impact, another panel on how we will impact our community as one institution, one university. I'd just like to frame this conversation by saying that ideas drive innovation, that universities are places where we exchange our ideas, where we share information. It's an opportunity to test our ideas, to experiment, and to give our students experiences. So if we're doing this right, we actually inspire. The University of Utah is well positioned to have the opportunity to be the impact maker in our community, to drive innovation and to create the opportunity for people to live better lives. And life enriched is how we see education. So with that, we'll talk about interdisciplinarity and exchanging ideas, impact, changing our communities, and leveraging our influence as one institution. We heard about the hopes and fears and faith of parents and students and what we're entrusted with. We've also heard about demographic shifts, which some will use to induce fear. It's my hope that we can think about innovation as a way of co-creating a future together, and that's crossing boundaries and borders, and interdisciplinarity drives much of that. To speak with us about that is Professor Mabel Rice, who is the Fred and Virginia Merrill Distinguished Professor of Advanced Studies at the University of Kansas, where she directs several things. I confirmed this with her just earlier. She directs the Child Language Doctoral Program, which was one of the first interdisciplinary programs in the country to train child language specialists, funded by the NIDCD, the Center for Behavioral Neurosciences of Communication Disorders. Her research is multidisciplinary and internationally collaborative. She's been a scholar in residence at MIT, at Harvard, at the University of Potsdam in Germany, at Curtin University in Perth, Australia, and a Japan Fellow in Tokyo. For our purposes, she directs the Merrill Advanced Studies Center, which serves as a catalyst for scholarship and the policies shaping university research. The Merrill Center brings together university administrators and research scientists for conferences that aim to identify the pressing issues and challenges confronting higher education, understanding different perspectives, and the creation of plans of action to enhance university productivity and research institutions. Among the many pressing issues identified under her leadership was making research part of the public agenda and championing the cause of research as a valuable state resource. Today, she joins us to address what is interdisciplinarity in the 21st century and why does it matter. So please join me in welcoming Professor Rice.
I'm going to talk about cross-disciplinarity, and I'm struck by the fact that I'm faced with a physics problem here to begin with. I'm so thrilled to be here, to be part of this very dynamic discussion, and such a positive vibe in the room for the energy and the passion for what is to come in the future for this great university. I'm especially pleased to be here representing President Watkins. Can I call her Ruth? I know her as Ruth. I'm here representing her alma mater as well, the University of Kansas. We too have a new chancellor, Doug Girard, and he sends his best wishes and enthusiasm that you raise your ranks in the university rankings at a very great rate and don't dislodge us on the way. He was unable to be here today, but he does send his very best wishes. I'm happy to represent Ruth's alma mater and also her home discipline. I'm also going to pick up on a lot of the themes that have emerged already. I'm pleased to see that these are lurking in the background of what we've been talking about. So I'm going to position the topic of interdisciplinary in the 21st century as being a matter of old silos of the mind and new silos of software. Now, software is one of those big words. It covers a lot of possible meanings. Ruth and I have studied a lot about language, so you're going to get the benefit of all that here if you're lucky. So I want to tell you what I'm going to focus on when I mean software. I'm not talking about the software that's controlling the temperature in this room, for example. Our buildings are all run on software systems, as are many other things in our lives today. But I'm going to talk about software of the kind of electronic data collection systems that have individual researchers as a unit of data entry. So I'm speaking from myself as a researcher and as someone quite deeply committed to cross-disciplinary study, and as someone who also is privy to some of the ways in which universities manage the business of education, which we've heard a little bit about here already. So we're going to begin by looking at what you all have to say about cross-disciplinary research as a lever for research success and expansion. This is a proven lever. It has a lot of leveraging ability, and it's stayed with us. Many of our universities have some explicit way of organizing efforts to enhance cross-disciplinary research. So your University of Utah strategic goals, number one is to develop and transfer new knowledge. And this is a transformative excellence program, which sets up as a goal the recruitment of clusters of high-achieving faculty in target areas of strength and societal relevance to ensure a vibrant future. That's a good platform to launch cross-disciplinary. And then it gets more explicit under the core value number 2, research and teaching excellence. The university engages in cutting-edge teaching and research that foster inter- and transdisciplinary innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship and knowledge, and technology transfer. Those are fantastic goals and core values. And let me back out a little bit now and unpack a little bit about what's going on with cross-disciplinary research. First of all, we have to start with the disciplinary part. So we live in a world where there's bases of knowledge. Some of these words I've seen on the screen already, they represent blocks of knowledge that have been established. Some of these science has been underway, arguably back to the Greeks and the Romans, and how they were solving a number of physical problems and other kinds of problems. At that time, science and philosophy were fused and didn't see much of a distinction there. But this is a list of things that we know. In the context of some of what I've heard already, you can think of them as a list of potential disciplines, places of employment. The child in there is our need to understand children, and so this also spreads out into education and other places as well. But in the university, as a management system, this system gets very conveniently boxed in. So we have psychology, linguistics, science, and whatever, and these literally become boxes. Most of our universities, these define the way space is allocated. It defines the way faculty are appointed into a very large and extensive management mechanisms of all kinds. And cross-disciplinary then is what happens when people can't find what they need in the box. It's a very heat-seeking intellectual endeavor to look elsewhere to find the answer. If you find that your background in speech language pathology isn't sufficient to prepare you for the details of language. You have to go to linguistics in order to find that out. You have to go to psychology for other answers. We're going to see that we use a lot of genetics, engineering, computer science. I'm going to come back to that. So here comes the cross-disciplinary part. Everybody is recombining these labels. It's very dynamic in there. It's really a heat-seeking thing. The people that look for these answers will go wherever the answers take them, and they're very happy. One of my favorite one is applied neuroeconomics. I had no idea that the people I study are people who pose a problem of applied neuroeconomics because their language limitations get in the way of them getting a job at the level they would be fully productive, for example. Okay, so we have the cross-disciplinary going on over there. And then we have something that has happened in the last, I don't know, we can argue 15 to 20 years. Genetics, engineering, and computer science writ large have grown exponentially. They have far exceeded any of these other things in their pervasive impact in all kinds of ways in the world of cross-disciplinary. Genetics rarely even exists as a label anymore all by itself. It shows up as prescription medicine, for example. We'll hear a lot more about that. All right, so we're in the universities and time passes and we get beautiful new buildings like this. They're cross-disciplinary. And then we try to figure out where to put these people. Do they go in the new building or not? Are they left with the home disciplines? What are we going to do with these guys? At the same time, we have other things coming online. I know that there's going to be some HR people talking here to follow. This is all these beautiful management functions, and they're dropping in, and they're a different kind of box. We have a world where we have place of appointment. Now, should that be in a department or a research center or a cross-disciplinary program? I'm a happy person. I'm in all three of those things. And then who gets the teaching affiliation and credit? And who gets the research affiliation and credit? And what about the budget, the fiscal management home base? The kind of work that I do, I'm always having to try to describe to people, well, I don't know if it goes here or goes there. I mean, you guys, don't you have an answer for this? Then there's all these evaluation metrics. Researchers have to go through university promotion and tenure metric systems. We go through funding source systems to decide if we're good or not so good. We have to go through yet other systems for publications. Our service gets vetted out in different ways for different purposes. And then we have these general management assignments. We have HR. Human resources. Now they tell me, they call me and say, what are you today anyway? Which category does this go in? And why don't you just have one? That would make it much easier. Parking even wants to know which one I belong to. Conflict of interest gets in there. Oh my goodness, the IRB, the Institutional Review Board. I do human research. And they get confused. Are you with that research center? Well, what about? We have this other one and you're with a department. What's that about? So on a good day, on a really good day, this system lights up in all kinds of interesting ways. The truth is that this is not just a unidimensional system. All this stuff is actually a grid. And there's days that I can wander in that grid, being driven there by various emails who want me to complete some template with a box to check somewhere or another. And these cross-disciplinary things, I mean, I think they're particularly hot. Now, when you look into those cells up there, you have to understand that that isn't a single cell. Those are cells all the way down. I mean, there's cells within cells and systems within systems. And I can't tell you how many times I have to tell people my birth date and how long I've been at the university. And if I'm a woman, I mean, it's nuts. None of these things, they all depend on a human still doing data entry. We're still the agent of punching the cards for these systems. So what happens then is, meanwhile, back at the university, we have this going on, and then we have the grid. That's the university's grid. That belongs to the university. And then the clouds. I mean, it's like the smoke from the fires that we have here. These are the management functions. And just like that smoke from the fires, it gums up the system. I mean, you feel, some days I feel like a butterfly specimen pinned to my desk that I can't wiggle anymore because of all of this stuff happening around. So here we are. The new challenges are how to overcome the silos of the mind in an era of silos of software. First of all, I think we have to recognize the power of these software categories, and they're almost always binary choices of some kind. That's the way the programming game works. But we can begin to believe that the choices we have to make in order to fill those things out constitute reality. They don't constitute reality. And I think that's some of the things the millennials are telling us. We don't like that stuff because that's not the world the way we see it, and that's not real to us. I mean, gender isn't even real anymore, and we still have to fill out these boxes. The other thing is that we need to recognize that cross-disciplinary scholars are at risk for immersion in proliferating software categories across multiple pathways of university systems and external entities that are intrinsic to the research performance, but the local university doesn't care about those because that's something that your professional organization requires or your funding source requires. And on some days I'm having to explain what the funding source requires to the people who manage the budget at home because the two systems don't align well. Then I think it will be helpful in order to work us through this is to establish advisory panels or feedback loops to find ways to cut through the potential fog of these overlaid data collection systems. So, anticipating Ruth would say, well, so what are we supposed to do about this? I'm happy to advise you. So this is revisiting the University of Utah core values for research and teaching excellence, this cutting-edge teaching and research to foster this laudable goal. The gray shading there is just a suggestion to throw out. In the way of these things, you pack a lot in your suggestion. It's one suggestion with many, many phrases and maybe more than one clause. The university will plan for facilitating innovative inter- and transdisciplinary scholarship discovery and entrepreneurship by providing efficient pathways through silos of management structure and software systems, avoiding clouds that obstruct the insights and energy needed to pursue vision across the silos of the mind.
Wow, thank you, Professor, for so quickly clearing the clouds for us. We are running a little behind time, so to speed things along, I briefly will simply say our next panel it will be moderated by Dr. Weyrich, who is our Vice President for Research at the university. He will introduce his own panel on institutional research impact and economic development, and the panel can make their way down.
So thank you. Hi, I'm Andy Weyrich, Vice President for Research, and thanks, Mabel. That was a great session. We're going to try to keep up with you. And our session is Institutional Research Impact on Economic Development. I think we can all agree we're kind of in an innovation-driven economy, for sure. And with that, we've seen so many advances in so many areas: healthcare, information technology, energy sector, and things like that. But one thing with that is we can understand that the research impact at the fundamental level and at the innovative level it really drives our economy, and so that's what we're going to discuss today. If we can put up the slides real quick, Natalie. And so, let's see here. I'm trying to advance it. Oh. If you can just advance that for me, please. And so this is a slide that I just wanted to introduce here, and then we'll have Natalie expand on it in just a minute. But I think sometimes we lose sight that research has a direct impact on the economy. So just by example, in FY17, the University of Utah brought in $460 million of extramural funding. That came from foundations, from industry, from the state and federal government, and from donors. I'm happy to say that we are up by about $55 million this year, so congratulations to our research community, and I think it will have a great impact on the economy. Of that $460 million in FY17, $176 million estimated goes into salaries and wages. Those are salaries and wages for students, for trainees, for staff, for faculty. In addition, of that $460 million, $240 million are actually in direct and induced labor income. So that's supplies, things that are bought, equipment within the state of Utah, but also our people who are on salaries, who are going out and going to a restaurant or going up into the slopes and skiing and things like that. They are actually investing in the local economy. And with that, we have $22 million in state and local taxes. So you can see that research has a fundamental impact on the economy, and it's one of those things. People always say, you know, for every research dollar, you at least get 2 on investment, but you can see that all of the research dollars go in and influence the economy. If we can go to the next slide, please. But the other thing that's great is that fundamental discoveries, innovations, the first thought that leads to a discovery that then goes to applied research, then goes into what we call commercialization in that aspect or that life cycle, you get an invention disclosure. And with an invention disclosure, you can see this is from research institutions in the past 25 years that are nationwide. We had over 380,000 invention disclosures. With that, 80,000 patents, 11,000 startups, and then you can see that 70% this comes from research institutions, and 200 plus drugs and vaccines and developed through kind of what we call the partnership between fundamental basic research and discovery to kind of commercialization and technology. And so it's absolutely clear that research fundamentally increases the economy, has a direct impact, but it also indirectly does that because it catalyzes innovation in the economy. And so we're actually here today with 3 fantastic experts to really talk about this in more detail. And I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, and then I have a couple questions, and then we'll let it go right to the audience. But we have Sherry Collins, who's the Deputy Secretary in Office of Technology and Innovation, Department of Community and Economic Development in the state of Pennsylvania. Natalie Gartner, who's the Director of the Chem C. Gardner Policy Institute, and she's also the Associate Dean for the David Eccles School of Business. And then Keith Marmar, who's the Executive Director and Associate Vice President in Technology and Venture Commercialization here at the University of Utah. So we're going to start with our guests, and Sherry's going to give us just a little bit of background on what she does, and then we'll actually go to Natalie and then Keith just to briefly introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning. My clock is still set to East Coast time, so I'm pretty sure it's still morning somewhere. As Andy said, I'm Sherry Collins. I have the pleasure of serving as the Deputy Secretary for the Office of Technology and Innovation at Pennsylvania's Department of Community and Economic Development. As I like to tell people, I am not responsible for ordering the phone systems for the state agencies, nor do I care about your Ricoh copier when it's not working. My team and I focus on supporting Pennsylvania's innovators and entrepreneurs that are spinning out of our colleges and universities across the Commonwealth. We are fortunate in Pennsylvania. We have over 200 institutions of higher education. 200. That's an astronomical number. And so when you try to be supportive and work with all of them, it really gets to be very much of a challenge. We are also fortunate that we have 7 of the top research universities, from Pitt to Carnegie Mellon, Penn State University, Temple, Drexel, Penn, and Lehigh University, last but not least, Lehigh, which is a fantastic engineering school in the northeastern part of the state. And the role that we get to play at the department is really to catalyze and leverage the activity that's occurring within these colleges and universities. We implement programs that help them take that intellectual property and commercialize it, where they're actually creating new companies that are staying in Pennsylvania, and they're actually employing college graduates and individuals from the communities. And we do believe that in Pennsylvania, our institutions of higher education play a critical role in advancing our economy. We partner with them very closely on a number of activities, even at the federal level. We have the Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Institute in Carnegie Mellon in the Pittsburgh region. We're also part of America Makes, which is focused on 3D manufacturing. So there's been great opportunities over the last couple years to really develop the relationship with the universities and to make sure that at the state level, we are actually supporting their efforts. Not only are we providing dollars to the universities for some of these federal opportunities, but we're also providing support to an organization known as the Ben Franklin Technology Partners. They are internationally recognized for the role that they play in supporting early stage technology companies in Pennsylvania.
Good morning, I guess still. Natalie Gartner. I direct the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. We have our origins in both the College of Social and Behavioral Science and the David Eccles School of Business. We are experts on the Utah economy, on Utah demographics, and on survey research. That's where we spend all of our time. Many of you that were here were able to hear Pam Perlich present as our first speaker today. Pam is a colleague of mine in the Gardner Policy Institute. I mentioned that we specialize in the Utah economy, which means that when people are looking at what is the economic impact of something, they come to us. When the state gives an incentive to a company, they're talking to us, is it worth it? If you want to understand the size of the life sciences industry in the state, or the defense industry, or the innovation economy in our state, we do that type of work. And so one of the things we're often asked is, what is the economic impact of the University of Utah? And I'll have more to say about that in the panel, but just a little teaser there for you. But we work at an incredible institution that is the state's second largest employer and incredibly important to the state.
Good morning. I'm Keith Marmar, and I work with technology and venture commercialization here at the university. What we effectively do is take the research that is done by the great researchers across campus when there's a point of invention and bring it all the way forward to make them into products and services. And when I say make them, I don't mean in the physical sense, but what that process effectively includes is, first and foremost, understanding what the technology is in commercial terms. So we have teams of folks that will analyze the technical aspects, the intellectual property aspects, as well as the commercial aspects. On the technical side, we work with our researchers to help them understand what further development of a technology would have to look like in order to have commercial potential. On the intellectual property side, we work with attorneys to protect that intellectual property. Most typically, it's in the form of a patent, but it also takes other forms of know-how and copyright and trademarks. And then from there, as Andy's slide pointed out, a lot of the commercialization work is in starting new companies. And so we have folks that work to not only work on the legal formation of the companies, but recruit management teams, get those companies set up, and increasingly work with the investor community, everything from the local angel investor community to national and international venture capital communities, to raise the necessary capital these companies need in order to get to a point where they can be sustainable and thriving contributors to the economy.
That's great. So I'm going to ask two questions, and then we're going to go right to the audience. The first one is going to be to Natalie, and the second one will actually be to kind of Sherry and Keith, kind of a combo question. But as we think about, you saw the one slide on research impact. At the university, we're still trying to learn to understand that and to measure it, I would say. And then the second piece is that, how do we message that? Research impact across to our state legislatures, our donors, and things like that. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so as an economist, when I think of the economic impact of this institution, both the research dollars that come in and then the services that we provide to the state, I have to divide it into components. So the first thing I think of is what we do for training human capital and giving people the abilities to go out and create ideas and create value in this economy. So that's what project number one. But we also like to look at how much new money comes into the state because of this institution. So I want you to just think for a minute, think of a pot, and then think of all the ingredients in a pot. Maybe we're making a gumbo or something, a stew. And think about if you are adding new things to the pot, it's actually you're creating more. But if you're just stirring the pot, you're just moving ingredients around. And so as economists, that's what we do. So we look at the University of Utah, and if it's just tuition of residents that come up here, that's stirring the pot. But if it's out-of-state students who bring money into the state, that's growing the ingredients. So the real big ingredient there is the research dollars, the around $500 million that was mentioned, that comes in and then circulates within the economy and creates secondary and tertiary effects. So that is the big one. But there's lots of other things that we would look at, including out-of-state students. To the extent that we provide patient services to out-of-state residents, which we do a lot of in this state, that also adds to the economy here. We would also look at visiting faculty that are here temporary but bring some resources with them and their living expenses and things. All of those things grow the economy. Now I mentioned that the University of Utah is the state's second largest employer. And depending on how you define employment and all that, you can play some games there. But that is nothing to, that is something that's very important to think about, because in this state, if you count the number of employees that are here, the number of students that are here, and then the patients that are served by this institution, we are everywhere. And that's a big deal to the economy.
So that sounds like how we should message. We are everywhere, right?
Yeah, and the same thing holds for our sister entities in higher learning.
Yeah, that's great. And Sherry and then Keith, you can follow up based on your experiences in Utah. But lessons learned from Pennsylvania. Can you comment a little bit on how effective partnerships between state and higher education institutions can actually catalyze commercialization and economic impact? And then Keith, if you can follow up, since you are actually from Pennsylvania, but now you're here in Utah, kind of your outside-in perspective in Utah.
Sure, so now it makes sense why I'm here from Pennsylvania, right? We were partners in crime when Keith was there and worked together a lot on a number of different programs, including some programs that were started probably back in 2003 under the Rendell administration. We had a rather large economic stimulus package. We needed a shot in the arm to really change the narrative around technology-based economic development. You remember I mentioned earlier the Ben Franklin Technology Partners. They started back in the mid-'80s as part of a bipartisan effort within the state legislature to really provide an opportunity where these innovators and entrepreneurs that were within our colleges and universities had a pathway to commercialization. And so what the state does is the state provides funding to those 4 Ben Franklin partners. For the last couple of years, we've provided about $14 million as a whole to them, each one taking about 3.5. Nobody wants to get more than the other because that creates a whole new dynamic. You know how partnerships can be. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're a little tenuous. And so we provide funding to those 4 Ben Franklin technology partners who then invest in those ideas and those concepts and those innovators and entrepreneurs that are situated within our colleges and universities and around that campus. And we're seeing a great deal of activity come from that opportunity. I currently work for Governor Tom Wolf, and when Governor Wolf came into office, now full disclosure, I'm not a governmental appointee, so to speak. I've been in state government for 32 years. I've spent my entire career working for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 2 capacities, one at the State Employees Retirement System, where we focused on institutional investors and we pumped money into venture capital for purposes of generating return for the pension system. The last 14 years I've spent at DCED, where I focus predominantly on this technology-based economic development initiative. So back to Governor Wolf. I'm currently working in the Department of Community and Economic Development, which is a cabinet-level agency, and our primary focus is supporting Pennsylvania's businesses as they grow and expand in the Commonwealth and abroad, but also supporting the communities in which these businesses reside, because we know that if you have a strong community, the business community will also thrive, and vice versa. And so one of the programs that he put into place since he's been in office, it took us 3 years to get it through the state legislature, but we finally did it. It's a $12 million initiative called Manufacturing PA. And the one primary component of it is to provide funds to our 7 research universities that I mentioned earlier. And the focus there is to take a fellow from within that university setting and place that fellow within a manufacturer in Pennsylvania, giving the manufacturer the opportunity to look at new market opportunities, perhaps to commercialize something new, or maybe just change the entire trajectory of their company. But we've modeled that off of some other successful programs that we've run in the past within the state. And so the department really is being used as the funding agent for a lot of these initiatives. And I know I talked to the president earlier from Salt Lake Community College. One of the programs that we want to run in Pennsylvania is What's So Cool About Manufacturing, where we are actually taking 8th grade students and sending them out into the manufacturing community, outfitted with GoPro cameras and an advisor to actually get them into the manufacturers and better understand what is happening there, so that these kids can make educated decisions as they come out of high school to determine whether or not they go to a 2-year, a 4-year, a technical, or go right to work. And so I've already messaged my team, ma'am, and told them that we are now looking at higher order skills as opposed to soft skills. So just as an FYI, I think the beauty of a day like this is that we do get to share things and that we do get to learn from one another.
So as Sherry mentioned, we spent a lot of time working on programs together when I was back in Pennsylvania. I think in Utah, our programs are structured differently. We don't have 200 institutions of higher ed, so things are a little bit different here. But I think programmatically where I see opportunities in Utah are, as we think about how those partnerships between the university and the state government can work, is thinking about the developmental path from a commercialization standpoint. Some of the programs that Sherry mentioned in Pennsylvania recognize that when you're doing research in an institution of higher ed, that research, as Andy referenced, starts off as basic research and then moves into what we call translational research. And it's at that point where you begin thinking about commercialization. But even from that point until you would see an actual product in the marketplace, the number of years that it's going to take and the amount of investment it's going to take is dramatic. So an earlier slide that referenced 200 new drugs that have come out of universities, the average time from when an invention would show up in our office to that drug actually being available on the market is approximately 12 years on average. The amount of investment that goes into that, depending on whose numbers you read, is about $1.4 billion per drug. So go back upstream and you start to think about a researcher here on campus. They need to do the next study and the next study and the next study. Those studies each cost $50,000, $100,000. So the grant programs that the state can provide, when this is still just formative, those programs are critical. And then translate that into, okay, now we're beginning to think about there's some potential here. We can see market signal coming about. So programs that we can either partner with the state, have internally at the university, or frankly, it's really a combination of all of the above because of the dramatic costs associated with bringing these technologies to market. Those programs have to become increasing both in terms of scale and risk taking. And I think fundamentally one of the sort of budding notions that universities are accepting is, if we're going to have the sort of impact that we want to have with bringing a drug to market, bringing a new semiconductor to market, the amount of risk we're going to have to take to translate that knowledge into the societal impact we desire to have, it's going to take that risk taking for us as well as with our partners.
So I think we maybe have time for one or two quick questions from the audience. And so we're going to and I have questions if you don't. So, but let's see if anybody raises their hand.
So Andy, if I can jump in here,
Sure.
I did a presentation earlier in the week in the upper northern part of Pennsylvania, and it was to a group of about 150 young women. And I strongly encourage them to ask questions. So I'm doing the same to this group. At least one or two would be great this morning. There we go. See, there's always one.
So I'm a healthcare researcher. I do rehabilitation research. My things, maybe if I'm lucky, will be to change practice a little bit. And how do you capture those things when you talk about the when you talk about the economic impact of the research? It's not going to be a sellable product in the same way.
I have a comment there just because it's sort of a philosophical approach to how we explain our value to the economy. And Andy had kind of said, give us some messaging advice, Natalie, but we have to be in the business of serving, okay? And serving can be a product, but serving can be something else. And I think in the grand scale of how we talk about ourselves, we talk maybe too much about what we do and not enough about just forming relationships with people so they are open to ideas of what we do. So let me give you an example locally. Utah legislature is incredibly important to this institution. When they think of the University of Utah as being in the service business, as a public university that's making their job easier, everything changes. And if we're just up there quoting numbers, we're just like everybody else. So since you mentioned the service aspect or the non-sort of tangible thing, I just wanted to make that point that I think it's not as much about messaging as it is about creating relationships and helping people solve problems.
If I can actually give an example from the university that I think speaks to that, but also still has that commercialization component. We've got a faculty member here, Jeff Rossenbluth, who has created adaptable recreational equipment, for lack of a better term, and giving people with lack of use of all of their limbs the ability to ski independently. And if you don't believe me, try it. It's pretty incredible. As a lifelong skier, I had the full rush of skiing while controlling this device by sipping and puffing. We've been working with Jeff to create a commercial platform, albeit a nonprofit one, for him to be able to get these out to people to provide that service. And so there will be really no dollars generated from a commercial sense, but it still takes that sort of structure for him to be able to get these devices out to the people who need it. And I think there are lots of examples like that, and it goes also to what Natalie said about being able to cultivate those relationships to put those structures in place.
And I'm going to end with a comment or a follow-up on that, and it kind of goes into our One Utah theme. So Jeff actually works with people that are all our trainees in the gaming world, and so Roger Altizer. And so every time they go out and they think about adaptive skiing, they're doing it also with rafting and sailing and things like that. They test it, and they work with Roger and all of our students to figure out how you can simulate it actually in the classroom, kind of in a gaming aspect, and then they can actually apply that when they get out on the ski slopes or on the water. So with that, I think we need to stop. I think we'll all be around and available to answer questions around lunch and things like that, but thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists.
And again, in the interest of time, I'll start introducing the next panel as they make their way up. But what you heard from our panel about impact is there are different ways that we measure our values. And as we talk about economic development, it's also important to understand that human development is key to what it is we do here as a research university. Our next panel will talk to us about One University, leveraging major research universities and academic medical centers. Leading that panel will be Dr. Michael Good. He is now our CEO of our University of Utah Health. He's also the Dean of the University of Utah School of Medicine and the Senior Vice President of the University of Utah Health Sciences. He's a professor of anesthesiology, and he comes to us from the University of Florida, where he held many leadership positions. And early in his academic career, speaking of products and services, the good doctor led a team of physicians and engineers to create the Human Patient Simulator. This is a tool that is a computerized teaching tool that is used in health education programs around the world. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Good.
Thank you. So we all probably have a friend or perhaps a family member who has Parkinson's disease. And with that disease come tremors, and the tremors can be extremely disruptive to carrying on quality of life. Many Parkinson's patients, when they dance, lose their tremors, and the tremors remain gone for 5, 10, 15 minutes after the dance finishes. So at a major research university with an academic health science center, a professor, a dance professor in the Fine Arts College, partners with a professor of neurology to try to understand the neural pathways that are causing those tremors to disappear for a little while. At another major research university, a group of lawyers, pediatricians, public health officials, and those working in the field of education study and look for better ways for early childhood development. It is so hard to be successful in life if one does not have a successful earlyhood child development. And again, it takes many perspectives and many experts to develop the best solutions. At another university, a structural biologist in the biology department, an infectious disease professor in the medical school, engineers studying high-resolution imaging, and pharmaceutics professors in the pharmacy college partner together. They use cryo-electron microscopy to analyze the substructures, the cellular substructures of these pesky viruses that challenge our human health. And they identify the substructures that could become targets for new drugs and new therapeutics to help us win our war, annual and global, on viruses. You begin to see in these examples the power of one university and how leveraging the power of a major research university that includes an academic health science center, how powerful that can be. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists today who both come from large research-intensive universities that have academic health science centers to help us explore this leverage, how it is accomplished, what its outcomes are. Dr. Sarah Mangelsdorf is the Provost and Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She is the Chief Operating Officer of the university and Deputy to the Chancellor in the overall academic leadership and administrative management of the university. Dr. Mangelsdorf began that role after serving 6 years as Dean of the Judd A. and Marjorie Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences at Northwestern University, where she was also a member of the Department of Psychology. And prior to Northwestern, she served as the Henry Preble Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the first woman to hold that position. And when she left that position, that role was filled by our new president, Dr. Ruth Watkins. Sarah earned her bachelor's degree in psychology at Oberlin College in Ohio and her doctorate in child psychology from the University of Minnesota. Our second panelist is Dr. Charles Zukowski. Dr. Zukowski is the Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Buffalo, a position he has served in since 2012. Dr. Zukowski joined the University of Buffalo from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. You begin to pick up a theme here. Yeah, there's a theme. Where he was chair of chemical and biomolecular engineering. At Illinois, he served as the Vice Chancellor of Research, where he led major changes in technology commercialization and economic engagement activities. His research focuses on the chemical and physical properties that underlie changes in the state of dispersion of colloidal particles. He holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Reed College and a PhD in chemical engineering from Princeton University. For our session, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share their thoughts on the one university, leveraging a major research university with its academic health science center, and then after each offer their perspectives, be thinking about questions you might have for them about this opportunity, how we engage it, and how we measure its success and its outcomes. Dr. Mangelsdorf, tell us about what's going on at the University of Wisconsin.
First of all, I want to say how pleased I am to be here to celebrate the inauguration of Ruth Watkins. She said she didn't want this event to be about her, but frankly, we're here because of her, so let's, you know. And you guys chose a wonderful president. As someone who's a bit of a data geek, I have to say I track all kinds of trends in higher ed, and I see a colleague here from academic analytics who does that for a living. And I think he would agree with me that University of Utah is a university on the rise. Whether you're looking at the grant dollars brought in for the first time ever exceeding $500 million in this most recent fiscal year, to the recognition they've received for last year. They were rated the top research university in the nation when it came to tech transfer companies, new tech transfer companies. Those are both quite impressive statistics. And I think some of it can be explained by Utah also developing the Center for Technology and Venture Commercialization to help foster, because we can have all the great ideas of basic scientists and bring teams of interdisciplinary researchers together, but if they don't know how to take things to the marketplace, you're not going to get those startup companies. This is also true at the University of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has one of the oldest tech transfer operations in the country. It was founded in 1925, called WARF, by visionary alums who wanted to, sort of harness the tech transfer and take the proceeds from the tech transfer to advance further research. And each year they then give back to us. Last year they gave us $100 million for research based on, both proceeds from tech transfer, but then also their investments, which then enable us to fund new research ventures and also faculty startups and so forth. And it's probably WARF is best known for things like how the vitamin D therapies to eliminate rickets, or the well-known drug Coumadin, otherwise known as warfarin or rat poison, but whatever. Still one of the widely prescribed treatments for cardiovascular disease in the world. And also smart processors in all those iPhones. We're still engaged in a lawsuit with Apple over who actually owns the IP for that. And the isolation of human embryonic stem cells and a number of other things. But some of the best examples that I've thought about when we had our discussion about what difference does it make to have your academic medical center on the same campus as the rest of your university? I think it makes a big difference. Even though we have all these ways of collaborating across countries and across time zones, there is something about physical proximity that makes a difference. And those of us who came from University of Illinois knew the struggles we had at times with our major medical school for our state system was in Chicago, and we were in Urbana-Champaign. And sometimes it was hard to foster the collaborations that we might want to have. Whereas on the Madison campus, I think they happen pretty readily. And one recent example of a startup company that's now been sold to Johnson & Johnson, or a subsidiary thereof. One of my neighbors, Fred Lee, is a radiologist, and he was very focused on developing tumor ablation techniques. And he was collaborating with a graduate student in, biomedical engineering. And at the graduate student's dissertation defense, this guy shows up, gets off his Harley. He describes it. He goes, "Who is this guy?" Shows up with these leather pants, hair wild, keeps interrupting the student during the dissertation defense and saying, "I think you're doing it all wrong. You should be using microwaves, not radio waves." And afterwards, Fred says, "Who are you? What was that about?" He said, "Well, I'm, professor in electrical engineering. I was asked to be on the students committee, and I'm giving you my best advice. I think it's going to work a lot better." He said, "Prove it to me." So they went on to do some studies, and lo and behold, it did work a lot better with the microwaves. They founded a company called New Wave that, as I said, has recently been sold. Very successful company. There was wives tell the story that they both took second mortgages on their house to fund this thing, and they were a little nervous about it. They perhaps should have found those angel investors instead. But there are those examples where, like the dance professor and the neurologist working together, I think that's what makes these great universities so wonderful, because you have all of these experts in all these different disciplines. We're not just specialists in one area. So I could go on and on. We have lots of other examples. I also think that what happens in a community when there are successes is that other successes come. So there's a company, hugely successful company in Madison called Exact Science. It didn't start in Madison, but they wanted to come to Madison because it's a place that lots of young millennials want to come, and they know, and we train a lot of great biologists, and then they can hire them. They're the ones who brought you those little ads about the alternative to the colonoscopy. You can just do it at home, Cologuard. Anyway, and then there's Epic Software that one of our computer science alums, if any of you have my chart on your phone with your, that's our company, that's right there in Dane County and employs 10,000 people. And it brought me here in a direct flight because I think somebody in Salt Lake City must use Epic Systems, or we wouldn't have direct flight out here. Probably you guys. Okay.
I think there's probably a whole symposium worth of ideas there, but we'll come back to a couple in the questions. But Dr. Zukowski, tell us a little bit about the University of Buffalo.
Okay, first I'd like to start by congratulating Ruth that she's been a fabulous colleague. Our careers have intersected, and as important is congratulating the state of Utah and the University of Utah. You've got a great leader. Great things are going to happen here. The University at Buffalo is a comprehensive university. We look very similar to the University of Utah. I have 12 different deans who report to me, and one of those is the dean of the medical school, but then we have the standard health sciences of the dental school and nursing school, pharmacy, public health, social work, and then arts and sciences, law, management, that sort of things. And we find that incorporating all of the skill sets in those disciplines to begin to solve problems across the university is very important to directions that we're going. I'll just start with a key one of how having a medical school is very important for us. Just in January of this year, we opened up our new medical school in the core of Buffalo. So Buffalo, as many of you will know, is a legacy city, meaning that we were very vibrant economically in the 60s, and then steel left, and the population was cut in half.
And legacy?
Legacy city.
That's the Rust Belt.
No, well, it is a Rust Belt city. No, it's my dean of architecture and planning calls it a legacy city. Okay. So I'm quoting an expert in the field. Okay. We, as part of the revitalization, we're following the route of many cities and going to eds and meds, and we built a new medical school in the core of the city with 3 different hospitals: Roswell Park, which is the National Cancer Institute, Women's and Children's, and Buffalo General Hospital. With the medical school, that Buffalo Niagara Medical Center now employs 17,000 people. And it was moving our medical school downtown that acted as the catalyst for what is now sort of a revitalization of this city. Cranes are going up, restaurants are opening, that sort of thing. And it indicates, again, what we've been hearing about the power of the economic clout of a university and of a medical center in making things go forward. Now you can pick, I'm going to give you sort of 3 or 4 examples here of how we also leverage our medical school, or other parts of the campus leverage the medical school because we are comprehensive. One of the first would be in interprofessional education. And so this is a growing demand for the training of health professionals, that you have to work in teams and you know how to work across these disciplinary boundaries. And so, like Utah no doubt has, there are interprofessional education programs. Our program involves bringing together all of the health sciences plus other schools, management, law, and arts and sciences, social work, show up at these interprofessional education programs. A scenario is given, students are broken up into groups to discuss how they would deal with the particular life of the individual they're looking at. And so, of course, all the MDs are there and the nurses are there, and pretty soon they're working on this problem, and a hand goes up, goes, "We need a lawyer." or we need a social worker in order to begin to deal with their problem. There's a tremendous amount of excitement when you bring the different professions together to begin to think about dealing with the human condition. It isn't just the crisis care you get in the emergency room or in the surgery that you're getting, it's the life before and the life after and how you're going to deal with sort of problems that you're having. An example that builds on that is that we just recently announced our clinical, let's see, I have to get it right, Clinical and Research Institute on Addictions. So this is the major problem that our nation is facing in substance abuse, in particular opioids. And this new sort of institute harnesses psychiatry, psychology, social work, public health, again, to work in three pillars. One is education of those who will work in the public, either doing research or work with patients in the public. So that's one aspect. The second aspect, of course, is the research. What is the best care? How do you get around addictions? And the third is the clinical care that we need to provide to our community. That it brings together all of the expertise of the campus, because dealing with substance abuse isn't simply a medical problem. It's a much deeper problem. It's a societal problem, a cultural problem, an economic problem. And this institute is bringing together experts in all of those areas to build educational programs as well as research programs, clinical care programs to deal with substance abuse. A third program that we have at the University of Buffalo is, we call them Communities of Excellence. And these were started not as research institutes, but to challenge faculty to come up with solving big problems that can only be solved by people from very different disciplines. So the problem had to be one that couldn't be solved by an individual, a department, or a school. It required broad expertise across a comprehensive campus to solve. One of the programs that we funded is called GEM. It's Genome, Environment, and Microbiome. And this group, of course, has the health scientists who are doing genetic sequencing, where we have a lot of expertise at the University of Buffalo. So there's a lot of healthcare that goes into it. But they're now collaborating, again, with all of these different disciplines across campus. One that we enjoy very much is the Coalesce Art Lab that works with the creative artists and is beginning to address questions of how you think about genetics and genomics and how it shapes societies and cultures and individuals, and work with it. They ran recently an installation at a big symposium where they took DNA from all the people in the audience and used that as a way to show the commonality of people across many different backgrounds. They now teach a course in dancing DNA, which is to use the human body as an expression of the central paradigm of biology. They also have now come together and wanting to develop a program in genomic literacy that is, as was described before, genetics is a big part of our lives, and we aren't literate in it as a society and as a culture. And so they are developing programs that go all the way into the grade schools and begin to talk about what is a genome, what is a microbiome. They're working with high schools in order to develop curricula and give students an understanding of what the genome can do for them. And then they're working at the university to offer broad sort of courses for all students, not just the experts in genomics, not just the biologists, in order to begin to think about genetics, genomics, the health implications, the ethical implications, the cultural implications of all of the information we're gathering on genetics and how it's going to shape us going into the future. The final example I'll give goes back to economic development and how the state leverages the university in order to grow the local economy. The state recently gave the University at Buffalo $47.5 million for the Buffalo Institute of Genomics. We call it BIG. Okay, and when we accepted money for BIG, we also accepted the obligation to grow 500 jobs in the region. And so this is how the state now is working with us. Money doesn't go into our base. Money comes to us when we are growing the economy. And so we took this money and we're growing jobs, and we do it to grow that many jobs, it isn't just startups. It takes too long. You want to bring in larger companies and grow local companies. One of the companies that we're working with is a company called Circuit Clinical. And Circuit Clinical was an MD who started it in Buffalo, and he simply runs clinical trials for big pharma. And he has strings of doctors around the country that can enroll patients, and he gets the contract, and then he runs those. UB invested money in his company to keep him in Buffalo. The relationship with UB is we have a special relationship. He uses our biobank that enhances the research of our scientists because we have access to now broader ranges of biological samples. He uses core facilities that we have when he needs to analyze data a little bit differently when he's doing his clinical trials. More importantly, the key piece that we get from him is he's now hiring our interns. And the interns can be medical students, they can be from the law students, they can be from the School of Management, they can be engineers. And that's one of the major benefits UB gets from this interaction is through the experiential learning that our students get through this interaction. So with that, I'll stop and open it up for more conversation.
So I think you can see with, I think the really exciting discoveries, the really exciting work is at the interfaces of the disciplines. And I think our panelists have done a great job of outlining just a few examples at their institutions of taking advantage of the interfaces that can happen from a one university approach. What questions might you all have for our panelists? Open it up. Please, go ahead.
So I had a couple of questions. One of them is, we've been talking a lot about the youth and how we have all of these students and they have this energy and they want to change the world and we want to be able to harness that energy. And as a faculty member in a school of medicine, I noticed that when our medical students graduate, they go to residency, and then after residency, whether they take an academic job or they take a clinical job, they take a job that takes every single breath. So there's no time for this. And I was wondering how you're finding ways to collaborate with those new assistant professors and those young clinicians to actually get those ideas across the campuses and bring them into industry at some time in the future.
Do you have examples?
Yeah, I would say we do have that challenge, particularly with the assistant professors. Those who are on the tenure track, they feel that they're trying to get their K award, their first R01, and they're seeing patients, and it's actually. They're not going to be really open to collaborations across disciplines at that point in their career, but post-tenure we do see much more interest. And we're trying to think of ways where we can buy out some of their clinical time if they're working on some of these collaborations and think more creatively about that, because I agree, it's a pretty grueling life, and particularly when they're just starting out and trying to figure it all out and get their labs established.
So
we also have those ideas.
I know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This burnout of physicians in particular is a big deal, and the medical profession has to begin to deal with it. However, the chair of our surgery department at UB takes the different approach. He just says, lean into it. Let's get excited. And he's building something he calls UB Rise, and it's all about how to take those entrepreneurial ideas and innovate and capture the attention of the residents and the faculty in order to actually innovate. And he was on the phone with me talking about monetary issues. Let's just put it that way, about how to build UB Rise. It was all about how to pay for it, but it was the concept was to build a center in which innovation can take place, and indeed it has to do with creating time for people to be innovators and making it easy for the big example would be that we don't own our hospital. You can't practice medicine on UB land for the state law reasons. So the clinical practices are legally separate entities from the university, and they're managed by UBA, we call it. It's a separate corporation. And he wants to build UB Rise, so finances go through this UBA, and he wants that because then activities that they're doing, say doing training programs, continuing education to teach surgeons how to use robots, for example, that can then be looked at as clinical time, okay, and help with their compensation that they would get. Instead of seeing people, there's another revenue stream that sits on that side in order to create time for them to be creative, in order to train the next generation or think about new ways of using technologies in the surgery. So there are ways to do it. It's just fascinating. He leans in and says, no, let's do more. And it's different than kind, cuddly, no, you wait till you've got tenure. He just is going, no, just work harder. And it's like, okay.
There are only 24 hours in each
And
day.
I know, I'm agreeing with you. This is why I'm amazed.
These guys are working their tails off.
Surgeons have 26.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there's
Exactly.
They figured
other
out the
questions.
The VP CAP program here that was started by Carrie Byington is another way to do this. We've been partnering with that program, and it's been highly successful, our junior people. But it is sort of buying, I think in the medical school, it's actually buying out part of their time. We're not buying out their time here in the college, but it's been really successful.
I think the overarching theme of the conversation is for the magic to happen, you have to get the right people in the room.
Yeah.
And I think you've heard a couple of examples or a couple of approaches. And again, probably not one size fits all, but you have to figure out a way to get the folks in the room to make the magic happen. Other questions? All right, flashcards are coming up behind me. I got pictures of lunch. So
right.
let's a round of applause for our panelists and a rich discussion.
Thank you. What a wonderful way to close out our morning. We heard about innovation, we heard about interdisciplinarity, and we heard about leveraging our well-positioning as one institution. And I love the reference to gumbo as we're leading into lunch, thinking about the ways in which we add value and actually circulate and create and generate value in this community. So we are at lunch. I'm going to turn over to Courtney Macbeth to give you details on how to get there. But once again, please let's thank everyone who participated in this session.